Okay, thank you for the discussion. Well, the AfCFTA really is a truly potentially transformative tool for our continent. We now have 43 countries that have ratified the agreement, which means that these 43 countries have committed to reducing and eliminating barriers to intra-Africa trade, barriers to intra-Africa investment, and other barriers that have persisted, non-tariff barriers that have persisted for the last 60 to 65 years in our continent. So really the AfCFTA is about consolidating this market of 1.3 billion people with, as you may be aware, with a combined GDP of 3.4 trillion United States dollars. So we are determined to implement this agreement. We know, of course, that there will be challenges and that it's going to take a long time before we start to see the benefits. Economic integration is not something that happens overnight. It takes time. So we have to be patient and understand that we are in this for the long haul, that integrating the market in Africa is a process and not an event, and it's a very challenging process, but a process that has benefits ultimately when we do implement the agreement.
You talk about the challenges. What are the challenges that we still have today?
Well, there are general challenges such as differentials in levels of economic development amongst African countries. We have countries on the one extreme, we have countries that have a GDP per capita of $110. On the other extreme, we have countries that have GDP per capita of $25,000. And so these economic differentials are very, very difficult to overcome in the area of a free trade area. The other challenge, of course, is we have countries that are landlocked, that have difficulty connecting to ports, particularly seaports. We have countries that are impoverished, that are least developed countries. All of these general challenges in respect of Africa's economy are going to be very difficult to overcome. We also have challenges that are more immediate in respect of the agreement, and that is there are countries that do not have any export capacity. There are countries that have a very, very low industrial capacity, and so we have to make sure that we work hard enough that these countries, that they also see the benefits of trade liberalization in Africa. So we have an opportunity, but also a challenging time ahead of us.
Talking about challenges, there are some political issues or some different issues between African countries. Don't you think this can be a barrier to the agreement?
There will always be these political challenges or conflicts or insecurity, border closures. These will always be there. But I do not think that we should be deterred by these challenges or these crises. Burkina Faso, Mali, as well as Guinea-Conakry are now all under military regimes. They've been suspended from the African Union. They've been suspended from ECOWAS. And of course, there are legitimate questions about how do you trade when countries are being isolated or when countries are fighting. These challenges will always remain. Our task is to make sure that we have ultimately that trade, cross-border trade, actually becomes a contributor to peace on the African continent. That's really the challenge, and I believe that we can overcome that. If you look at the history of Europe, Europe was not always at peace, but Europe managed to have a very successful integration model, and that integration model sustained even when they were having conflicts. Of course, there were some temporary setbacks, but in general, the European model of integration is a successful one.
So you think it will be successful no matter what?
I think it will be successful because we have unprecedented political will. There are the heads of states and the assembly of governments of the assembly of governments of the African Union rather is very determined to make sure that we implement this agreement, and that we do so in a way that will enable Africa to achieve economic and market integration. Of course, as I've just said, it's going to take time, but we have to be patient. I mentioned the example of Europe. It took Europe 72 years to get to this depth of integration in their market. We are starting 65 years after independence from colonialism, and this, of course, is a late start, but nonetheless, we are where we are. We now have to redouble our efforts to integrate our continent.
Today, after the Russia and Ukraine war, Africa is being affected. Prices are rising every day, foods, oil, everything. Is this the right time for the African Continental Free Trade Area to start working and also gain?
This is absolutely the right time. There are two crises that underscore the point that you make. First is the COVID-19 pandemic, which has demonstrated in very, very clear terms the weaknesses that Africa has, whether it is over-reliance on global supply chains or interconnectivity with Europe or countries of the north, such that when those export markets are shut down, we suffer. That's what COVID-19 demonstrated, that we have to accelerate the integration of our continent so that we develop our own regional supply chains and our own capacities on the continent. We have seen beginnings of this with the breaking of the ground yesterday here in Rwanda to start manufacturing of vaccines here. And to create a connectivity of supply chains for vaccines throughout the African continent. And so this is the lesson that we should take, that COVID-19 has driven us to be more self-sustained as a continent and to be more self-reliant in terms of our own supply chains. Similarly, with the crisis in Ukraine, many African countries are exposed because of their over-reliance on the import of wheat, barley, and other cereals from Ukraine and Russia. There's a country in Africa that imports over 70% of wheat from Ukraine and Russia. This impact on Africa is obviously very, very it has a materially adverse impact on food security. It affects food security very negatively. 27% is in the inflation rate that has been caused by the crisis on wheat and wheat-related products. So it is a very severe crisis. But it also demonstrates, again, similar to the COVID-19 crisis, it demonstrates that we must accelerate self-reliance in these different areas, whether it's industrial capacity, agricultural or agro-processing capacity. We have to rely more on ourselves than the outside world, particularly for these value chains that have an impact on Africa's food security and have an impact on productive capacity in Africa. So we will be meeting next month with ministers of trade And we will also invite ministers of agriculture. We will invite African Development Bank and Afreximbank so that we can devise a strategy for how do we get our continent out of this crisis, and how do we make sure that we use the resources that are available. You may be aware, African Development Bank made a facility available, a finance facility for agricultural products to help us to overcome this crisis. So we've got to do that in a way that is linked to trade, to enable agricultural products to be traded across our borders, to be processed across our borders, so that we can ultimately achieve the self-sufficiency that all of us want to see.
Before we close, is there something that you'd like to add?
Well, what I would say by way of conclusion is first, we are acutely aware of the desire of Africans for this to succeed. And we are acutely aware of the positive impact that this will have on Africa's industrialization, on Africa's global competitiveness, on job creation, and in general on improving Africa's overall economic outlook. But it's going to take time. It's not something that will happen overnight. We have to expect that we are not going to see the results immediately, but we have to start somewhere, and we have introduced the tools that will enable us to succeed. We are implementing this agreement alongside, for example, the Pan-African Payments and Settlement System, which will enable cross-border trade and payments of trade in local currency. We're introducing an AfCFTA adjustment facility, which will also enable countries to see the benefits of trading under the AfCFTA. We are also going to introduce a digital platform that we call Africa Trade Gateway, and this will enable interconnectivity of our businesses as they seek to trade across borders and across regions of our continent. So these are the tools that we are introducing. Of course, we know that there will always be these challenges in trade facilitation, in transit of goods, as you mentioned, also conflicts that emerge here and there. So we have to be prepared for all of these crises. Well, the message I would have for Rwanda is that there are significant benefits. I think the fact that Rwanda was one of the first countries to ratify the agreement demonstrates very clearly the commitment that this country has to the AfCFTA, and also the recognition that there will be benefits. And the benefits will be small, medium enterprises, young entrepreneurs. They will now have access to new markets outside of the East African community. They will have access to markets in North Africa, in East Africa, Southern Africa, and so forth, to scale their businesses and to take advantage of this market of 1.3 billion people. Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you.